Greetings and salutations, this is Imperator Vespasian and his trusty sidekick.
Hello.
We're having a look at the Fireforge Games Sergeant at Arms from the Des Volt range.
What are Sergeant at Arms?
Okay, complicated one. Which country are you talking about? You see, in England, a Sergeant at Arms is basically the King's bodyguard, the royal bodyguard. In France, it means a lancer, a knight with a lance. Cavalry, which is where the term chivalry comes from, an armed man on a horse. In other countries, it also means lancers, or troops who use lancers. In England, it may originally have meant that, but really, Sergeant at Arms, other than normal sergeants and knights, Sergeant at Arms tend to be the guards of the king or the guards of the leader. England only had 40 of them, so there were a lot less Sergeant at Arms as there were knights. So there weren't that many Sergeant at Arms, and it may actually be, rather than arms as in weapons, it may actually originally mean sergeants who are allowed to come within arm's length of the king.
Yeah, which is what I thought it was.
Yeah, because not many troops normally would come too close to the king. It depends which king you're talking about. If it's King John, then he wouldn't let anyone go anywhere near him.
Because everyone wanted to kill him.
Yeah, if it was King Richard, then he used to just hang around with the normal soldiers and like sleep in their tents and stuff. So he didn't really care. But Richard only had 40 sergeants at arms. That's about the most we ever had in England. In France, I think they had about 60, and they were really the really well trained, well experienced soldiers who would fight close to the king. And therefore, the king's more likely to survive battle because he's got his biggest, bestest mates with him, who are really good at killing people. So, yeah. Well, let's open the box and let's get into it then. So we'll pop the box open. Have we done a video on the normal sergeants yet? The mounted sergeants?
Yeah, we have, I think.
No, we haven't. No. Right.
No, for there.
So, these are the Sergeant at Arms horses. They differ from the Crusader horses because some of the horses don't have a sheet. If you look, that's the Crusader horse. Some of the horse heads have a cover, so you can have the entire horse in cloth, or you could have the horse with a bare head, and then you've also got horses without. Usually the first rank would have the sheet over the horse because they're the ones being shot at, and they would be the troops carrying a lance, and then the troops behind would usually not have a lance or may carry a lance, but they would be there for hitting people on the ground basically. So they would usually have a long mace or a long axe or something like that. So that's the horses. Let's have a look. Oh, interesting. Right, we have a spare weapon sprue. This may be... Let's have a look. Yeah, this is a different type of design. I haven't seen this box before. So that's a weapon sprue. It has crossbows on it. The maces and axes, as mentioned before, although they don't really appear to be long enough.
How long had crossbows been around from there on?
The Romans had crossbows.
Did it normally, did they use them, did everyone get given them, or did they still have long bows?
Crossbows are really for people who didn't know how to use a weapon. They were for people who didn't really want to get close up and fighting. Sergeants did carry crossbows, and they had mounted crossbows. I think the Italians were the first to make full units of mounted crossbowmen. And the reason for that was they would use copper-tipped crossbows or steel-tipped crossbow bolts, which would be used to penetrate armour. and so they were anti-heavy infantry, so they were anti-knight basically. A longbow won't go through normal armour. The average longbowman can't afford pointy things on the end of his arrow that are really expensive, so longbows generally won't damage a knight, but crossbows are useful for damaging knights. So if you're coming against knights like the Italians were, they were kind of surrounded by knights, and they were fighting a lot of what you call civil wars between the city-states. Knights were a big thing, and so you needed some way of dealing with it. And it would make sense that the crossbows guarding the king, the knights, the men-at-arms guarding the king would have crossbows, because you'd be able to shoot enemy knights who were getting close to your king. You don't want that. Just zoom in a bit. You can see them better? Yeah, they are lovely figures. These guys in mail will come in very handy, because I have discovered that the Scandinavians don't have crossbows.
How come?
I don't know. They don't have crossbows in the box. So I will have a few spare crossbows left over from all my sergeant's boxes, and so I will use those crossbows for the Scandinavians. But no, they only have bows. Same with the Russians. The Russians don't have crossbows either. They only have bows.
Well, they probably did it so like that people came up with the crossbow, got it, have it.
Crossbows. Usually crossbows would be used by untrained soldiers, usually paid soldiers, mercenaries, because then you didn't have to spend any money on their armour and stuff, and they could kill enemy soldiers from a distance. Usually crossbowmen would carry a sword for defence, whereas bowmen would carry a mace, something anti-tank, so to speak, something anti-armour. So that's the weapons, and the spears. Those spears are the correct length. When you look at the knights on horseback, the lances for Central Europe or the Crusades are too long. They're very long lances, but they are the right lances for fighting in Russia. Because the cavalry in Russia had to use very long lances because the Russians used long spears. So in order to take on Russian infantry, you needed a longer lance. So the lances in the boxes are not the best for the Crusades. You could swap them out for normal spears. Chainmail armoured spears are here. You also get them in all the knights' boxes, so you can just swap them over. The sergeant's box also has long lances, which I'll go into when I do the sergeant's box. So that is the correct length spear. Usually about 6 foot long. Between 5 and 6 foot long. That's how long it would usually be. Basically, it's long enough for a rider to be able to stab anyone around him with the spear. It wasn't actually used as a lance. So that's that. I'll put that there. And then we have the figures. I believe all the figures are the same. They are. So with this one, I would assume this might be one of the earlier boxes they made. These ones don't have a separate set of sprues, so they've actually wasted quite a bit of area where they could have put useful things like weapons, but you know, that's life. The shield is a rather small shield for the period we're doing it in, but the shield is more or less okay for earlier on because these are close combat troops, so the shield is really a target shield. You can see that there? And they're quite small shields, so they're really just to ward off people trying to hit you, whereas the exact bit we're doing, we would need larger shields for the horses. Usually a large long shield to protect the leg and the arm to protect you from arrow fire. The figures are the same as the figures you get in all the boxes, and the cloaks are the same as well. The helmets are just normal sergeant helmets, so it's a pretty generic. The sort of figures picked from the other boxes, which go together to make the unit you wanted to make. Although another thing with the arms is the arms are all sort of set arms. So you plug the shields into the arm rather than normally you have the sort of hand and you stick the shield on. These actually have plugs for the shields. And let's have a look. Oh, no spare arm. I would assume the spare arm's on that screw. So yeah, that's about it. What were we discussing? I said I'd open the box first.
What I mean, discussing about what the Sergeants at Arms are.
Yeah. So the Sergeants at Arms would generally be very well trained troops that were used as bodyguard rather than sort of regular soldiers.
So what was the most common one? Was it the arm's length one? Arm's length from the king? Was that the most common one?
That's probably where the English version of it comes from. Most other countries, sergeants at arms means basically a man with a lance or a man with a spear.
Like mounted sergeants?
Yes, like the mounted sergeants. So each country would have its own version of explaining it. Usually in places like France, the sergeants at arms would be armed like knights. So there would look almost no difference between a sergeant at arms and a normal knight. So that you would look like there were a lot more knights, I would assume. Whereas in England, the sergeant at arms would not have massively heavy armour because they had to dismount and fight on foot. They had to be near the king all the time. So they weren't overly armoured and they were able to actually do everything themselves without needing supporting troops. Knights generally had 2 men assigned to each knight, and another 2 men to ride additional horses for the night. Sergeants at arms would basically have their own horse, and they'd end up on foot if they ended up getting dismounted. So knights wouldn't be just a knight; there'd be a knight and then a retinue to each knight, of a couple of heavily armed soldiers, spare horse being pulled behind, all that sort of stuff. And I would assume the sergeant would be able to give his horse to a noble if needed. A horse, my kingdom for a horse. Although that's slightly after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Were the men at arms heavily armoured, like knights?
No, I said that already. They would wear full chainmail because everyone wore full chainmail. So their entire body would be covered in chainmail. They would have armour, the sort of studded armour you normally see on figures from the period, and then they would have the cloak over the top, the cloth over the top, which would usually be it would have felt underneath it, which would stop arrows getting through, and then you would have the livery of whoever it was you were fighting for. So it would have English livery if it was English. It would have different coloured liveries depending on which. There's so many different liveries. You'd probably be in yellow if you're German, red if you're Danes, blue if you're Swedish, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But it would also depend on individual knights, because individual knights also employ their own private soldiers. Not Crusader knights, that's different. These guys aren't Crusaders. These would be used to support either national army figures like the King of France who was on the Crusades. They'd be with him. Or they would... Actually, no, the King of France would actually have men who look more like armoured knights than these, but they would have a full enclosed helm, whereas these have the open helm. But yeah, I think I'm getting all confusing now, aren't I?
Yes.
But I'm trying to make it make sense. So I'm trying to think. Yeah, so they wouldn't be Holy Order Knights. You wouldn't find these in the Knights Templar. You wouldn't find them in any of those. Because the Knights Templar cavalry are different. They wouldn't wear. They would wear slightly better armour as well. Mainly because it was paid for. Next question?
That's it.
That's everything. Right. Well, as said before, the weapons, the sword and the axe, which is there, does appear to be too short. That's a close combat weapon for foot soldiers. It should actually be a longer, slightly longer weapon, so you can reach off a horse and hit people. Those weapons are clearly for foot infantry. Although, as I said, sergeants at arms were also trained to fight on foot as well. They would dismount during the battle and fight on foot, often alongside the guy they were protecting, to prevent any infantry from getting too close to the king's horse or whatever. I suppose a crossbow would also come in handy as well. It's the same situation. It's defensive. Yeah, interesting.
Yep.
At the Battle of Agincourt, the sergeants at arms cut their spears down. They cut them down to be about 3 foot long, and used them as sort of stabbing, short range stabbing weapons against the French knights, as opposed to the longest spear used on horseback. Because a long spear is only really useful if you've got, or a spear is only useful if you've got ranks and ranks of men all with spears. A spear on its own is pretty useless. It's hard to move around because you end up hitting other people with it. Have you ever tried to walk through a street with a ladder or a long pole?
Yeah.
You'd hit people walking down the street by accident.
Yeah, because we used to carry them massive...
Yeah, we did.
rolls of parcel paper and used to hit people.
Yeah, so you'd walk down the street, and if you were carrying a spear, then you'd kill half a dozen people just walking down the street. I mean, there were people laying on the floor behind us as we walked, so imagine if we had sharp pointy things on the end of them. So, in close combat, when you're fighting and you haven't got loads of spearmen, you would cut your spear down and use it as a close combat weapon. A short close combat weapon, stabby weapon. And then you resort to a mace, which is really the best weapon you want, really. Everyone should have a mace.
Yeah.
And that's it then, if you have any more questions.
Yep.
Bit of a boring one, the sergeants at arms. Because they're not an actual thing.
Army unit.
Yeah, and they're really just like guards.
The king guards.
King, duke, lord, whatever. So everyone would have a group of soldiers protecting him. King's bodyguard sort of thing. So that's it. That's the end of the video. Do you have anything to add other than that?
No.
No? So, outro.
So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and comment down below what you think of the sergeants at arms. That's everything from me.
And everything from him. Goodbye.